Perfect. Yeah, thank you. All right, hello everyone. My name is Maria Lamardo. I am the head of accessibility training at CVS Health, which is a US-based company, and it's like one of the biggest pharmacists. And I'm also a Vue.js community partner and an accessibility advocate. Again, my thoughts are my own, but welcome to my talk on preventing accessibility issues. If you're interested in getting the slides as I go through the content, please use this link or this QR code to access that content. I'll give it a second. I see some people with their phones up. Awesome. All right, so today we're going to be talking about what accessibility is, getting into some digital accessibility, and some of the most common accessibility issues that you might encounter on the web. I want to get started with some of the data around disabilities around the world. So there's currently around 1.3 billion people worldwide with some sort of disability. That accounts for about 1 in every 6 people has a disability. And that makes up 16% of the global population. So when we're not making accessible content, we're really discarding a huge amount of the population. So let's take a look at some of accessibility in some physical spaces. So we're going to get started with looking at this building that has a lot of staircases. They're very pretty, but none of them are really accessible. So unless there's an elevator inside that building, somebody in a wheelchair might not be able to go upstairs. Looking at this other example, we have a lot of staircases, and they have kind of like a zigzagging ramp. Though this looks like a great idea, and it's like they solved this problem, this is actually not super great. You have to kind of zigzag 9 different times to get all the way up. There's no railing. It's not very safe. If you need to stop, take a break, you might fall like 9 set of stairs. So really, it's too long. Then we have this other building that has a ramp, and it's great. It's accessible. It's on the side of the building. You can easily get through. However, this is kind of not the same experience as everybody else is getting, right? You're requiring people to go through the side of the building instead of through the main entrance of the building. And then now we're going to look at some examples of accessible ramps. However, they might have ran into a couple problems. So here we have what could have been an accessible designed ramp, right? But they decided to add a street pole right in the middle, making it completely inaccessible. We have another one that they almost got it. However, they put this heavy, heavy pot in the middle, and I can't imagine it's very light to move, especially after you've watered it. Now, here's an example. It's pretty accessible, pretty easy ramp right into the main entrance with a couple of steps next to it. That's pretty nice. However, let's talk a little bit about inclusive design and how we can actually design our content, right? Not just in physical spaces, but in digital spaces as well, so that there's one single experience that works equally for everybody. In this example, we see that the main entrance has no steps, no need for ramps. Everybody has the exact same experience when they enter through the building. So think about this example in physical spaces and how we can kind of navigate this into the digital spaces. So just like in physical spaces, we want to make sure that we're building and designing digital content to be used by as many people as possible. So just like you wouldn't build a 10-story building without an elevator, there are certain things that you have to pay attention to in your digital content so that everybody can use your content. So one of the things that I recommend is first to take a step back and really understand the different digital experiences that people have. So understand how people navigate digital content, what tools they might be using, how those tools interact with your applications, and what are some of the challenges that they might encounter as they try to navigate and use your content. Really try to include people with disabilities into your process, whether that's through testing, research, so that they can tell you firsthand what their experiences are like. And consider how your design decisions are making a change in how they are able to interact with your content, and from there, build upon those digital experiences. So think back to that inaccessible ramp that had that pole. Even though you might have the right design intent, the implementation piece is just as important. So really, you have to work hand in hand with your designers to make sure that you're creating a cohesive and accessible experience. So let's talk a little bit about some types of disabilities. So for motor impairments, people may rely on things like voice recognition, single switch access, eye tracking, mouth sticks, head wands, adaptable keyboards. For visual impairments, people might use things like screen magnification, screen readers, and Braille. For auditory disabilities and people who are hard of hearing, they might be using things like hearing aids, and they also might rely on things like sign language, captioning, and transcripts in your media content. They might also use tools like this, that they have text on their phone. For cognitive disabilities, we want to make sure that you are reducing the cognitive load and using simple language, as people might need cognitive aids and might be using communications tools with applications like Proloquo to Go. So I don't have time for this today, but I really, really encourage you to check out my slides and look through these demos. They're amazing, and you're really going to get a nice understanding of how people use screen readers, voice control, so that they use their voice to control what's on the site, and also Braille. So that machine that we just saw that has like the little Brailles on top, it's great, great resources, and they'll really help you understand your users. So again, accessibility, the web was fundamentally designed for all people, regardless of their hardware, software, language, location, or ability. So when we're thinking about accessibility and integrating it into our process, we're doing just that. So let's talk about some common accessibility issues that exist across the web. So actually, WebAIM, who's a great resource for accessibility, they do this yearly report called WebAIM Million Report. And what they do is they actually evaluate the home pages of the top 1 million websites across the web. And they actually came up with a couple of numbers this year. Well, actually, this is 2022 in May. But they found that 96.8% of all home pages have accessibility issues. That means that almost 97% of the web is not fully accessible. That's a problem. They also found that there is an average of 50.8 errors per page. However, one good thing is that they found that 96.5% of all of these errors are actually falling into only 6 categories. So let's talk about those. So some of the categories that they found were low color contrast issues for text, missing alternative text for images, empty links, missing input form fields, form labels, empty buttons, and missing document language. Pretty easy to fix. Now, I looked at other reports done by Paciello Group, Site Improve, and BrowserStack, and they also found other issues that include things like visual indicators, headings, keyboard navigability, and missing ARIA attributes. So let's talk about each of these and how we can do things to improve this. So we've got making sure that you're including accessibility into your planning and to your software development lifecycle, but by kind of identifying and adding your accessibility requirements into your definition of done and acceptance criteria, making sure that you're using best inclusive design practices and using UI accessible components. Same thing for accessibility. For in the implementation side, follow best practices, use semantic HTML whenever possible. And make sure that you're testing for it and coming back to fix those issues that you've found. So luckily, they actually have the web content accessibility guidelines are a set of guidelines that will kind of walk you through some of the things that you can do. And actually, here's the report that they found. You should definitely take a look at that. But the web accessibility guidelines are a set of guides that kind of highlight all of the things that you should be paying attention to when building your applications. And today, we're going to be talking about perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So they kind of grab those, this entire set of guidelines and break it down into 4 main categories. And they're called the 4 main guiding principles. So again, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So let's start with perceivable. Users must be able to perceive the information that is being presented, meaning that it shouldn't be invisible to their senses. So there are things like alt text, time-based media alternatives, presenting your content, how users are able to see and hear your content. But today we're going to focus on the common issues inside this category, and they include color contrast, missing alternative text, and voice indicator issues. So looking at low color contrast, we want to make sure that we're providing enough contrast between text and its background so that text can be read by people who either have low vision or cannot see a full range of colors. So let's take a look at an example here. So here I have kind of 2 pieces of text. One is has pretty bad contrast, and the other one is just right. But I do want to run an accessibility checker. This is the IBM tool, and I've linked to this. And you could see that, hey, my site has a couple of issues, and you can see right here that it says, hey, you're missing low color, non-text content, has not enough color contrast here. So that's something that you might need to check. So again, for some recommended testing, you can do automated tests to catch some issues, but manual checks are going to help you catch anything that might have been missed. Like things like placeholder text might not always be checked by automated tests. And then we have some resources for how to choose accessible colors. Missing alt text issues. The guidance here is to provide alternative text for non-text content so that text content can be changed into other forms. Like some people might need to see that visually or auditorily or tactilely or any combination. So you want to make sure that you're providing that alternative text. Recommended testing is automatic. You can catch the fact that something is missing an alt text. However, you're going to have to do manual testing to make sure that it's descriptive enough for the image that you're using. So let me show you some examples. Oh, and there's a handy decision tree that they've made for you. But I have a picture of a dog here, and the alt text that I've added here is puppy rolling on the grass with Scott's super soft toilet paper. Let's say that I'm on a website selling toilet paper. However, that might not be my intent. My intent might be something like an adorable puppy, happy puppy rolling on the grass, ready to be adopted. Let's say that that's what my site is about, and that's why I included this image. So again, it's not just about describing the image, but think about the intent as to why that image was included on your site and work with your designers to add that in here. And if something is decorative, make sure that you're hiding it so screen readers aren't kind of encountering that and having to go through this content when it's purely decorative. So talking about visual indicator issues, we want to make sure that we're providing an indicator when something is in focus so that people can determine where they are on the page visually. And for this, we want to make sure that we're doing manual testing. So just grab your application, start tabbing through your entire application, and make sure that you always, always, always see a visual indicator and that that visual indicator is not lost. So we can go through a little activity for that. So just here's a little great resource for us. But as you see, I'm going to just tab through, and you can see that that focus is kind of showing you where I am on the page. I will never lose that as I go through the site. And that's something that you want to make sure that you're doing. And make sure that you're meeting color contrast with that as well. Let's move on to Operable, which is another main guiding principle. And in here, you want to make sure that your user interface, forms, controls, and navigation are all operable by a keyboard. You're giving people enough time, that you're not providing anything that causes seizures or anything like that. But let's focus on some of the common issues for this principle. Here, we're going to encounter things like empty links, missing form labels, heading issues, keyboard navigability issues. So let's talk about empty links. Let me go through an example first. So here is a site, again, kind of the same site that I was using, talking about patterns for links. And one of the things I want to show you, I'm actually going to turn on my screen reader. I'm using Mac OS, so I'm going to be turning on my voiceover.
To enable screen reader support, press Command plus Option plus Z to learn about skip to content, short.
Ooh, and you actually can't see this because the way that the screen is shared. But with this tool, I'm able to open this thing called a rotor tool. And it's kind of like a gray box that goes on top of this screen here, which I'm seeing it on my laptop. And what it does, it gives me a list of all of the links that are available on this page. And it just says, I'll just kind of read them off. ARIA Authoring Tools Best Practice Guide, W3C Web Accessibility, APG Home, Patterns, Practices, Index, About. So it gives me the list of absolutely all of the links. And if I'm just getting a bunch of read more, read more, read more, read more, learn more, that doesn't really give me a lot of context as to what I'm trying to access. So you want to make sure that your links are descriptive.
Voiceover off.
So that when people are trying to access them in that way, they know where they're going. So again, give them proper description so people understand what the purpose of it is and know where they're going and what the destination is. Again, you can catch empty links with automated tests, but manually you should be checking for the meaningful text that those links have. Next, we're going to be talking about missing form labels. So let me show you an example of that. And actually, this one is going to be talking a little bit more about, let's do a little bit of this.
Yes. Engineer, yeah. Yes. Prismic.
Okay. So I'm actually going to just inspect my input field, and I'm going to go in the accessibility tab here. And what I want to show you is that On the input field, we see that we have the name, we have an autocomplete attribute, we have a required attribute, aria required, aria described by, and then it's linking to the label with an ID. So if I'm looking at the accessibility attributes, we see that all of that is here. But what I want to focus on is the computer properties. Here, it tells me what the accessible name of that specific component is, where it got it from. So right now, it's getting it from that label, and it even highlights it when I hover over it. And then it even has things like descriptions, the role of that specific element. So it's a text box that has a name, and it's grabbing it from the label. And then it also has a description that is being grabbed from this helper text here. So if I was using a screen reader, I would get to this in this form field, and it would say name, followed by the description of that input field. So this is kind of how it all works together. So again, providing meaningful labels into your forms will help people understand what type of data is expected from them. And we recommend that you use automatic testing to catch that there are labels. However, you might want to do manual testing to make sure that there are appropriate labels being used. And there's a nice resource there to create accessible forms through WebAIM. Then we want to also make sure that your headings are descriptive, that they follow and provide context to the rest of the page, so that people understand what kind of information exists there and how it's organized through your page. You have to do manual testing to make sure that it's descriptive enough. And then there are some resources on how to test for those tools. So making sure that you're providing heading structure, that you're nesting in hierarchical order, that you're not skipping any heading levels, using your H1 as the most important heading on the page, and use descriptive language. So let me just go through one example. So in this, I'm going to actually be using this heading map tool that I've linked to. And when you're using that, it actually kind of breaks down the entire structure of the headings that you have on your page. So you can kind of see like, okay, well, this whole structure under H2 has things like acknowledgements. I see editors, or ordinary editors, major contributors. So I think this makes sense in the way that the content is structured. And you could see how you can kind of start navigating and mapping out your site like this. Next, keyboard navigability. You want to make sure that all the functionality that is on your site is available through keyboard. That way, people who are using keyboard or keyboard interfaces and alternatives can use this application without relying on eye-hand coordination with the mouse. So recommended testing is manual testing, especially when it comes to custom components. But then there's an awesome resource for this, and I'll share that with you now. But there's a pattern library here that they've created, and it kind of highlights some of the rules. So I'm going to actually go to an accordion, and then it says, well, if you're building an accordion, make sure that you're following this pattern. This is how you should be building it, and here is the keyboard functionality for it. So as you're building your keyboard interaction, then you know that you have to tap to it. You can expand with Enter or Spacebar, and making sure that you're able to enter that content as needed. So again, follow the rules that are already highlighted for you for this type of custom content. And OK, second to last one, understandable. You want to make sure that your content is understood by all people and that it doesn't go beyond your user's understanding. Common issues here are missing the document language. So for this one's really easy. You just want to make sure that you're adding the language attribute on top of your page so that both assistive technologies and user agents can render text accurately based on that language, since it's been identified. So I'm going to just quickly show you an example here, and I'll do this in two languages, in French and in English.
To enable screen reader support, Lignes d'Avantage selected. Link.
Qu'est-ce que l'accessibilité du web?
So you see that it kind of read it with a French accent because it knows that this is French. And if I were to do that with an
Introduction to web,
with the English version,
leaving the introduction a gravel accessibility to web visited. Link. What is web accessibility?
So again, making sure that you're providing the right
Voiceover
language
off.
attributes so that it's read correctly. Then last one, robust. You want to make sure that everything that you're building remains accessible as technologies advance and evolve. And you can do this by making sure that you're using the appropriate techniques and best practices. So one of the issues that we have here are issues with empty buttons and also missing ARIA attributes. And I'll talk a little bit about what those are, but I do want to hop over and talk about some. Ooh, sorry, I lost my glasses, so accessibility issue here. All right, so I'm going to just explore, inspect this button here. So again, opening my little accessibility tab in the Chrome DevTools, I can see that the accessible name for this button is search, which was gotten from an ARIA label. So let's say that for some reason, I'm using this functional image that's now a button, but for some reason, because I'm pulling it from a third-party library or whatever, it comes in and it doesn't have an accessible name. Now my button is seen as an empty button because it doesn't have a name. So something that you can do is add things like ARIA label, which overwrites any name that the element already has to this one, so that you can kind of see that hierarchy here. And then it also talks about the roles and some of the other attributes that are true for this specific component. So again, for buttons, you want to make sure that it has a name, so assistive technologies and user agents can pick this up and kind of gather information about the status, about the active state of this element. You can do automatic testing for the name part of this. However, there are other things that can be wrong, missing ARIA attributes altogether. So again, we want to make sure that we're communicating the states, roles, name, values programmatically so that it's available for all assistive technologies. And some of the resources are, again, back to that authoring practice guide, which talks about what ways you can build these things and what ARIA attributes are absolutely needed for these. So I'm going to actually jump into a tabs pattern. So I'm going to go a little bit down, and they talk about certain things that you absolutely must have that aren't necessarily semantically available through HTML. So they're talking about things like tabs, tab lists, tab panels. So what exactly does this mean? If you go kind of past the keyboard interface, they do talk about some of the why ARIA roles, states, and properties that you should be considering when you're building this type of component. So again, when you're building something custom from your site, come check out this resource. Look at what they're saying about some of the components and things that you need to kind of look at, and then apply the correct attributes to these. So here's an accessibility tab. I know that I need to be able to tap to it. If I tab again, I'm out of that tab already. But if I'm in the tab, I should be able to, with my arrow keys, tap through all of the tabs, and then that content should be updating as I go. Again, I got all of these rules from that article. So you should be doing automated testing to catch some missing attributes and values, but a lot of it is done manually, particularly when it comes to custom components and their functionality. So with that, that is all the time I have today. But before I wrap up, I want to say that no ARIA is better than ARIA. So if you're unsure, please do not add ARIA. Actually, the Web 8 Million reports found that home pages that had ARIA present actually averaged 70% more defects than those without ARIA. So if you're unsure of what you're doing, leave it out or read the documentation so you know how to implement it correctly. Again, here's the pattern library again. And there are things that absolutely require ARIA attributes to expand on the native functionality of HTML. So there are times when you absolutely do need it. So please read up on this. And it's a fun read, honestly. All right, with that, thank you all so much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
So much, Maria.